My husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy, so he took her for a quick drive, the motion of which usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, and I was still in the store. I was unsure how much longer I'd be in there, and cell reception was poor inside. So he pulled back into the parking lot to wait for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her in her car seat to sit on one of the benches outside the store. He took a business call and had just sat them down, absent-mindedly rocking the carrier, when a woman approached them. She's well-dressed, probably mid-30s, and has average height and fit build. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable toothless grin, especially when she's deep into a good nap. But her nap schedule is paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked over right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he can even finish his sentence, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight. He yelled, "Excuse me, put her down," as his panic mounted. She remained calm this entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she'd approached. He ran full speed ahead and tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting to restraining her arms. This woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping! Help!" She kicks him in the shin and pulls a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Of course, no one in the parking lot has seen the earlier interaction, and they all assumed he really was a kidnapper. He's a lone guy in a Deadpool t-shirt versus a tiny, well-dressed woman. Immediately, a man knocked my husband to the ground and was holding him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shaken up and insisted she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up. All he needed to do was to wait for the police and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show them family pictures on his phone, but too panicked to think clearly, this manifested as him shouting, "I have pictures of the baby on my phone," which of course everyone interpreted as him having stalking photos. It was at this point that a man kicked my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. I can't entirely blame that person, considering what he thought was going on. It was at this point I was coming out of the store, and I thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, but I was panicked, and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then I realized he did not have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move my daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran up to the people holding my husband down. I was waving my wallet, pleading, "Take everything you want. Just let up and leave us alone." And one of the men holding him down said something like, "Lady, we need to wait for the cops to deal with him." And I was so confused. Why would the muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Then I heard someone saying, "He tried to abduct that woman's kid." I did not understand and was sure I'd misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child. And we have 4 kids. If he were going to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would be at the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly, it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic tiger cub mode, literally leaped out of my heels, and sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter, and I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could think to do was grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand. Amazingly, none of the other bystanders had yet to connect that my husband was telling the truth, and this woman was absconding with my baby. I yanked on her hair as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. I was so scared and surprised that I actually just threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket, and stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child she claimed was hers, which would be pretty damn incriminating if I'd watched this scene unfold. Within the next couple of minutes, police had arrived. After all that, there were still several bystanders who explained it as my husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting her description weren't investigative. They were questions thinly veiled, trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing blame on my husband. Here is a small sampling of their questions. Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and she was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extricate the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them for her own family members? Bottom line, the police spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine than they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby was not actually hers. My husband had called his brother at that point, who works in an office with a lot of lawyers and connected with one. The lawyer gave us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number and to request copies of the store's security tapes right away. We were also advised to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home. My husband and I both just shook and cried until we had to get our other kids from school. My husband was seething with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do. Also, he had 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. To the officer's credit, they did ask if he'd like to press charges, but we understand the guy was genuinely convinced at the time that he was on the right side of intervening in a kidnapping. That man stayed to talk to the officers and apologized to us profusely when the truth became clear, so we declined to press charges. Amazingly and frustratingly, there were still people who stuck around to talk to police who were giving my husband dirty looks. One couple even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it was really our baby. What a day. But I'm glad that our baby wasn't taken away. To the parking lot kidnapper and the skeptics that day, you better hope we don't meet. I'm a female and was 4 years old when this happened. My sister had just turned 16 then, and she was so excited to finally be able to use her license. It was one of the first times my sister would get to pick me up from my babysitter, which means it would be one of the first times she'd been allowed to drive with me alone. Almost as soon as we pulled onto the main road, a white pickup truck swerved behind us. Weird, but whatever. After a few turns, my sister noticed that the truck still followed her. Even when she would just switch lanes, he was right there switching behind her. My sister, being a bit of a paranoid person, tested it a little and switched lanes several times. She said she heard his tires squealing by his quick cuts to get behind her again. She told me not to worry, and I remember being an oblivious little kid. She looked scared, but I had no concerns. The man started to get really angry. I don't remember anything about what he looked like. I do remember that he had this look of pure hate on his face. It's strange that you can sometimes remember expressions, but not the faces they were on. He was honking the horn repeatedly, just laying on it, and he was very close to our car. He was swerving back and forth, trying to get our attention. He would pull up beside us occasionally, flip us off, and honk. The first big event came about when we pulled up at a 4-way stoplight. It's a bigger one, so there was a lot of room in the intersection. We were the first ones at the stoplight in our lane, and nobody was beside us. The man used this lane to pass us and pull his car in front of us, almost in the intersection. He was blocking us. I so vividly remember that white pickup truck. He got out of it and started storming towards our car. He was screaming so hard I remember thinking his face almost looked purple. Neither one of us remembers what he was saying, but he pulled up his shirt to reveal to us that he had a gun. He pointed to it and at us, threatening us and closing the gap between us. My sister put her hand over my body, told me to close my eyes, and floored it through the intersection. She said she was worried we were either going to hit him or get hit in the intersection, but it was a better chance than sitting there and waiting for the psycho with a gun. He hopped back into his car and followed us. My house was closer to where we were than my sister's, so for some reason she decided to go to my empty house. Obviously, he followed us and blocked us into the driveway. He got out and walked towards my sister's parked car, pulling his gun out. Once again, she had to think fast and swerve her way across our lawn back out on the road. This is before cell phones, and she had just started driving and was still young. She had no idea what to do. He followed us back onto our neighborhood road, pulling up next to our car and hitting his truck against us, trying to make us skid or wreck. There is a small area of grass between my neighborhood road and a major busy road, and it was obvious he was trying to push our car hard enough to send us into the traffic beside us. He had his gun up on his dashboard still, all within reach. I remember him doing that little gesture where you drag your finger along your throat, like you're slitting it, like he was going to kill us. His face was still purple. There was a gas station nearby, and my sister decided on the last thing she could think of. I remember her talking to me so seriously and sternly. She told me she needed me to be a big girl and, the second we pulled by the door of the gas station, to undo my seatbelt and jump out. She told me to run inside so fast that I shouldn't even worry about closing my door. I was to run inside and go directly to the person behind the counter and tell them to call 911 because a bad man was following us. We pulled in, she threw the car in park, and I jumped out and did as I was told. She was only a few seconds behind, but she had to actually stop the car. She closed her door and mine for me and just ran inside with me. The man came into the parking lot behind us, and when we were inside, he went through my sister's car. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They never found him, and we never knew what provoked him or what his plan was. The only thing he took from the car was my sister's ID and the cash she had on her. When I was about 4, we were broken into twice. The first time, my grandfather and Mum had been grocery shopping. We arrived home and unlocked the front door, and one of the bedroom doors up the passageway slammed shut from the change in air pressure. My grandfather must have sensed something was up and ran up the passageway to the bathroom. The window was open, curtains swinging in the breeze and nobody to be found. They figured he mustn't have been there long before they arrived home, as nothing in the house was touched or taken. The second time was 3 months later. My mum woke up to someone sitting on the bed with a knife in his hand at 3 a.m. Mum says she was completely petrified. She couldn't talk and couldn't move. She said he was mumbling, but she couldn't make out what he was saying. Then next-door neighbor's dog barked, and he just stood up and walked out. She then heard the back sliding door open. About a minute later, she grabbed the phone and called my grandfather. All she said was, "There was someone in the house." My granddad lived about 5 minutes away with my mum's 3 younger teenage brothers. In less than 5 minutes, they pulled into the driveway and scattered to surround and check our house. Every single door was unlocked, and the back door was open. There was nobody to be seen. Mum was a mess. There were big, muddy footprints in the laundry under the little window she left open for the cat. It took a few days for all the weird things this creep had done to be discovered. He had shredded a black negligee that was in the laundry basket. He also fed the cat and poured her a bowl of milk. The intruder even poured a whiskey out of the decanter in the living room and added ice and Coke to it. Somehow, he also had injected solder into the eggs in the fridge, ate the leftover roast meat out of the fridge, and cut up some catalogue that were sitting on the bench. He took a photo of the stovetop and another one of me sleeping on Mum's camera. He then left the camera on the table near my bed. Strangely, he also tipped lots of table salt into Mum's shoes. Nothing else was taken except for the knife that was missing from the kitchen block. The creep just did some really weird things. The cops came and got plenty of fingerprints, but whoever it was didn't have a record. That event messed my mum up for a lot of years. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mum. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. He greeted me cheerfully and said, "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chattering. He said a lot of things and asked a ton of questions. Here are some that I could remember. Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course, you're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? If that's not enough, he continued, being creepier. You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers? Thankfully, we were nearing my house. I ran forward, up the back steps, and through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long and very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mum, who said maybe it was on his way home from work. But then the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home and if I talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure and whether I could be forgetting something. I told him no again, and my dad frowned. Then how does he know your name? He asked. It turns out that was not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister nor I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told us that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me and my sister. Things got complicated after that. My father had called the police, but there was not a lot they could do. This time was before there were any anti-stalking laws. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. Dad then called a friend of his from back in the day who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone and I couldn't play outside. I couldn't even walk to the nearby Super America. That's sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. Then one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, my mum and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple of weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German shepherd, born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was Ramsey and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself. He said the window in the kitchen could easily be opened with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked. He also mentioned the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch, and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. One time, my parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. Also, my older brothers were at Saints West roller skating rink. I remember my sister was on the phone with her best friend, and my little brother was on the floor asleep. I remember it was late at night, and I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. Suddenly, the top of the French doors swung inward, and in the few milliseconds, Before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light. This way, we could see outside somehow. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. My sister asked out the window what the man wanted. He stepped back and said it was pizza delivery and asked us to open the door. She scoffed at him, declaring she was not stupid. She could see he didn't have a pizza, and she was calling the cops. The man left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened, and they walked around the yard, watching for him. They came back in, and things settled down. By now, we had pretty much given up calling the cops because it never helped. We just went back in, each of us carrying a knife from the kitchen just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway into the dining room and at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try to see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the door windows, so he still couldn't see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door. Then he cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There on the other side of the window pane was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but didn't find him. A couple of weeks later, I was at school and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name, and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mum. That same day, my mum had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he'd called to say he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night, thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table was his gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. Maybe he was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a time, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events, and many more, took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, and everything else were gone. For a long time, during and after the Dr. Ramsey days, I would have a recurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, or in a coma. Sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. I've worked security on and off for several years to supplement my income, so I've heard quite a few creepy stories from co-workers. Probably the most legitimately scary story I've heard was from a guard that was working in a closed-down arena. The building is more than 100 years old, but hasn't been used since the early 2000s. The city was keeping up with basic maintenance as it waits for a buyer. There's usually one guard assigned to the building. It's a 6,000-seat arena with a huge basement and 2 additional floors that have lots of old office spaces, dressing rooms, and a separate, smaller community theatre type stage that's upstairs. The usual guard is doing his rounds through the building. The building itself is very interesting, as it's largely unchanged since the heydays of the 70s and 80s. The upper floors are largely dark and are pretty creepy. Anyway, the guard is doing his normal rounds but feels unnaturally creeped out. It's his normal post, but something feels different today. He's feeling jumpy but shakes it off and continues. He's a very diligent guy, so he walks every floor of the building. He's in the very top of the catwalk system above the main arena where the old spotlighting equipment was. It's a narrow wooden catwalk system. Suddenly, he hears a loud creak behind him, like someone is walking. He spins around and sees a guy standing there. The man is frozen mid-stride, like he's been tiptoeing up behind him. Guy has an unsettling, mischievous-looking smile on his face, like he's been caught with his hand in a cookie jar. Dude has a big steel pipe in his hand instead of a cookie, though. The guard pulls his gun, and the guy takes off running in the opposite direction and disappears into the labyrinth of the building. Cops come and sweep the building with a K9 but don't find him. They do find that he's been playing in the dust that's on top of the old concession counters. He had written a bunch of bizarre helter-skelter type unsettling rhymes and drew a bunch of stick figures hanging from nooses. The speculation is it was some crazy homeless guy that had been hiding in the building a few days. He had made a game of following the guards without them knowing it. I saw the writing still on the counters the last time I was there. My mother used to work at a hotel in Washington, D.C. back in the 1990s. She worked as maid and housekeeper since she needed money because she was a refugee from Vietnam. Even though she didn't know much English at the time, she knew enough to get by at her job. All the other staff and hotel guests loved her because of how sweet she was. Because of this, anytime high-profile guests like the Backstreet Boys would stay at the hotel, the manager always sent my mom to clean the room. Anyways, one day, a guest came. Who will we refer to him as Mr. Doe, because I don't know his real name. He checked into their most expensive suite. As usual, the manager told my mom to go take care of his room. As she got there was a "Do Not Disturb" sign. So, she told the manager she would come back later. What was weird was that no one was ever allowed in his room. The man stayed there for over a month, and not one time did he let a staff come in to clean. However, he paid a lot, and he gave a warm welcome every time he passed a staff member, so no one paid him any attention. Then, one day, people didn't see him anymore, so they assumed he checked out, though the receptionist had no account of this. Since it had been so long since the room was cleaned, the manager told my mum to go check it out and try to clean up what she could. Also, the "Do Not Disturb" sign wasn't on the door anymore. As she got to the floor and unlocked the door to the room, a disturbing smell hit her. She couldn't figure out what it was, but she continued to survey the room. It was disgustingly messy. Her words were that it looked like someone had thrown a rave, even though no other guests seemed to have ever gone into the room besides Mr. Doe. It had looked like the man had deserted the place without telling anyone. Anyways, my mum was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track it down. As she followed the smell, she could tell it was coming from the hotel room closet. When she opened the closet, there was nothing but a cardboard box on the ground from which the smell was coming. In the moment from being a housekeeper, my mother's first instinct was to open the box to see what it was and clean or throw it out. When she opened the box, what she saw scarred her to this day. It was the decomposing head of a young woman. My mother immediately screamed and got out of there, where she fainted in the elevator. Once she woke up, cops were everywhere, and the hotel was like a CSI scene. The manager told her that Mr. Doe wasn't his real name, and he used a fake credit card to check in. The head of the woman was identified to be an escort. I don't know much more and any nitty-gritty details, but I'm sure one can look it up on the internet for more information. Needless to say, my mum quit that day. One of my childhood homes had a balcony that was attached to both my mother's bedroom and mine. There were big glass doors in each of our rooms. Next to the balcony were 2 trees. I often used to climb up and down one of them from the balcony. One night, my brother and mother weren't home. I was about 13, reading in bed with a very dim reading light. I heard what sounded like something moving in one of the trees outside, but this didn't worry me as possums and bats are common in our area. Now I had thin curtains on the glass doors that separated my room and the balcony, and the doors faced out towards the street where street lamplight was always visible through my curtains. Shortly after hearing the tree rustling noises, I see a shadow slowly move past the doors, at which point I immediately turn off my reading light and freeze like a deer in headlights. The shadow is tall, so it wasn't a neighbor kid, and it wasn't my 5-foot mother. The person moved slowly, creeping as though they were trying to not be noticed. They wouldn't likely be able to see into my room, but I could see them thanks to the streetlights behind them. They moved past my doors out of sight. I sat there unable to move or even think about what to do other than be absolutely still. That is, until I heard another sound, the sound of someone trying to open a glass door. That's my mum's doors to the balcony. I didn't know if she had locked them or not, but I wasn't taking chances. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could to my bedroom door and locked it. I listened for what the person was doing now, and they were still jiggling the glass door handle. It sounded like the doors weren't opening. I felt relief as this person couldn't get in. Surely all I had to do was wait for them to realize that, and then they would leave. I heard light footsteps move back along the balcony to my set of glass doors until I saw his shadow stop directly in front of them. Again, I froze. He couldn't see me, and he couldn't know I can see him, could he? I saw a shadow of a hand reach up to my door's handle, and my heart stopped. Had I actually locked those doors myself today? I was out there earlier. What if I forgot? The seconds leading up to him grabbing the handle felt like an eternity. But thankfully, when this person tried to open the door, it did not open. It was locked. I sighed such a sigh of relief I was worried he had heard it. After this, he began pacing the length of the balcony. I didn't have a mobile, and the landline was at the other end of the house, but I was scared to take my eyes off of them. I was silently crying and praying they would just leave. Then I heard him stop moving. He then said, "I could just break the glass, you know." Before I could even process this, I saw car headlights turn around the corner of my street and then stop at our property gate. My mum was home. The person on the balcony moved out of sight, and I heard a loud thump as they jumped off of it. When my mum came inside, I was hysterical and was barely coherent in telling her what happened. Eventually, I got the message across, and she called the police. They never found or caught anyone, but a neighbor reported a truck parked nearby that time. It matched the description of a truck which was reported recently for attempted child abductions near my school. 6 years ago, I tried Tinder for the first time. I was 25 at the time, and while most 25-year-old women have dabbled on Tinder or the like, I hadn't been single since I was 17. I met my ex while I was in high school. We got married 6 years later and had a baby. I was happy. But those last couple of years together, he had really begun to resent me and the family we had created together. I fought to keep our relationship together, but the abuse became more frequent and more intense. It got to the point where I took our baby and fled the house in the middle of the night. My mind was scarred and my heart was raw. It was a really difficult time in my life. A couple of months after I left, I had a new home, a new job, and a renewed sense of life. I was starting to open up and could feel myself healing. I was, however, lonely. I was adjusting to shared custody and spent my weekends alone. I didn't want to jump into a relationship, but I did want to experience some of the things my 8-year relationship hadn't allowed me. Joining Tinder felt fun. It was new and scary, and after so much trauma, it felt nice to have so much positive attention. My self-worth was low, so the cheap compliments and instant gratification of the app felt incredible. Who am I to deserve their attention? Why would they choose to speak to me of all women? It's not my healthiest coping mechanism, but I wanted to feel desirable. That's when I met Derek. Derek was an unassuming, average guy. He was cute enough, but not so attractive that I felt self-conscious. Derek and I shared a few interests, craft beer, hiking, and he had a sense of humor that I liked. We agreed to meet up at a local restaurant. I was so nervous as it was my first date in 8 years. I donned my cutest dress, got made up, and headed out. As I waited in the restaurant, my palms were sweaty, my heart was fluttering, and I began to question myself. He arrived and everything was awkward at first. We ordered our first beers and started to break the ice. As soon as the buzz of the alcohol began to hit, our conversation took off. We had relaxed in each other's company, and the rest of the date went smoothly. We joked about karaoke across town. I am a huge fan of karaoke. While I am no superstar, I've spent a good amount of time in choirs and can carry a tune well enough. One of my favorite rowdy weekend activities is going to that bar and busting out some songs with the sweet taste of gin on my tongue. I convinced him to go with me, and we left the restaurant. We sang into the night, taking shots, flirting, laughing. We ended the night in his truck, clumsily fumbling with each other's buttons and zippers, hearts racing with excitement. This had been what I needed. We texted back and forth more often, and soon we were talking about another date. I had enjoyed our time together and liked that I didn't feel a deep connection with him. It was fun, and that was it. Because my heart wasn't tangled up in feelings, he felt safe. We decided for our second date that we would go tubing down a river that runs through our town. We had parked his orange truck at the end of the tubing run and took the tubes in my truck upriver. We agreed that he would zip my truck key with his into a pocket on his shorts and that he would drop me off at my truck afterwards. The bright summer heat warmed our skin, and the water felt crisp and fresh on our toes. The afternoon slipped past as we floated down the river. When we reached the bottom, we deflated our tubes and headed back to my truck. Only, when Derek reached into his pocket, his face sank. He looked at me and said, "Your key is gone." I laughed. Surely he was joking. He insisted this wasn't a joke. Gravity pulled at my stomach, and I began to panic. This was the only copy of my truck key, and I had taken it on the river. I felt foolish and worried about how I would get a new key if we couldn't find it. The river was long. We had been tubing for hours. We'd stopped at several places to swim. He offered to drive me home, and I accepted. During the drive, we made a plan to meet up the next day to search for my key at some of the stops we had made. We spent the next afternoon combing our swimming holes for my key. Up and down we swam, with very little hope that we would ever see my keys. We had to try, though, and we kept at it. From one spot to another, we drove, we swam, and we moved on. At the very last place we checked, as the light of afternoon faded into a hazy orange, something caught his eye. Underwater near the shore were my keys. We were elated and could not believe our luck. To celebrate, we went back to his place for some drinks. He drove me down a long wooded driveway, and at the very end was a shaded trailer. He told me that he was only renting a room here from an elderly couple, but they were on vacation, so we would be alone. We walked over the creaking porch and entered the trailer. Inside, I could see the kitchen was messy. Not just a couple of dishes, but every surface was covered with mess. He ushered me away to show me his room. It was small and not very clean either. There were dirty clothes, mattress on the floor, a Rubbermaid bin with some snacks like Doritos, and cheap, warm beer. We had sex, the yellowed light of the trailer accentuating the stains on the walls. Afterwards, the spark of fun I had felt when we first met had withered, and I felt gross. I decided that it would be our last date. A week passed, and we hardly texted. Our brief fling was ending, and I didn't expect to see him again. My mind moved on to other things. The coming weekend, my friends were coming to town, and I was excited. We made plans to go to karaoke together on Saturday night. When the day arrived, I was surprised to see a text from Derek on my phone. "Are you going to karaoke tonight?" it read. I responded that I was, and he texted back that he would be there. "I thought you didn't like karaoke," I asked him, and he said that he had been invited by a girl he worked with. He thought he should give me a heads up that he would be with a date in case I was there. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know, reassured him that I wouldn't be bothered at all, and said that I hoped he had a great date. Around 9 p.m. that night, my friends and I arrived at the bar. The dim lights and reflective foil stars, an all too familiar scene. We got our drinks and picked a booth with a good view of the stage. I had a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned my head, scanning the bar, and our eyes locked. Derek and his date were a few booths away, and he was watching us. He waved zealously with a big smile. His date turned around to look, and I managed an awkward wave. I was absolutely fine with him being on a date, but I didn't want to advertise that we knew each other or make his date uncomfortable. My friends were all aware of the time we had spent together, my thoughts on the experience, and the texts he had sent me earlier. We were all thinking it was a bit odd that he would go out of his way to interact with me in front of his date, but no harm, no foul, I guess. Maybe he was just being friendly. The evening carried on, and we all had a great time basking in the atmosphere, drinking in the songs and the laughter. A couple of hours in, we were sitting in our booth when Derek stumbled over to our table with his date. He introduced her as Kate. He then plopped down beside me, pulling her down into our booth next to him. The strong smell of alcohol oozed off of them, and I could see they were hammered. It became obvious they had both had too much to drink, their eyes glazed and words slurred. Kate seemed really nice, despite her state, and she launched into a drunk story to the whole table. My friends and I were fairly uncomfortable and were unsure what was going on. Under the table, I felt Derek's sticky hand slide onto my thigh. His date was right there, and I was stunned. Without making a scene, I subtly removed his hand and excused myself to get another drink. As I walked across the room, I could feel his eyes raking my back, and sure enough, when I turned around, he was watching. When I got back, Kate was slurring that her taxi had come. She and Derek exchanged a sloppy kiss and good nights, and then it was just us and Derek. Derek's mood shifted after that. He was drunkenly unaware of how uncomfortable the table was, and we could tell he was brooding about his date having left without him. Derek turned his attention to me. He slung his heavy arm over my shoulder and leaned in, his sour breath managing to come together to form clumsy sentences. He said I am cute, and he loves my laugh. I was rigid and just wanted him to leave. When he got up to get another beer, my friends and I spoke about the situation. One of them remarked, "You know you can do better than this, right?" I said that yes, as casual as this had been, I had made a mistake. We came to the conclusion it would be best if we ended the night early, as we didn't see him leaving me alone. As a backup plan, if anything went south, we agreed that the girls would go to the bathroom and leave out the back door while our male friend would distract him and slip away. Derek arrived back at the table, sloshing his beer onto his front. He slurred and asked, "Where are we going next?" I hesitated, but my friend told him that we would all be going home. Derek said he would walk us there, and we politely declined. He was leaning up against a wall and barely holding himself up at this point. We asked him how he was going to get home and if we could call him a cab. Derek drunkenly pouted that he could just come to my place with me. Trying to shut him down as politely as I could, I told him that my child was there with a sitter, so I couldn't have him over. He didn't need to know that wasn't true. He refused a taxi and said he would just sleep in his truck. Since his eyelids were drooping and looking at the rest of his state, it seemed reasonable that he would be able to fall asleep in a truck, and we accepted that answer. As we started to leave, he stumbled after us. We stopped and reminded him that we were going to bed. He argued again that he should come with me. My friends and I locked eyes. It was time to engage with our backup plan. The two girls and I excused ourselves to the washroom while our friend distracted him. Slipping out the back door, the cool rush of night air hit us, and we hurried to the path that led to their hotel. Our friend caught up with us and said he had left Derek behind at the bar. We were all relieved to be out of there and started the walk back to their hotel. One of the girls was sober and offered to drive me home when we got to the hotel, and I accepted. A few minutes down the path, my phone began to ring. I looked at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It was Derek. I turned the volume down and let it ring, and to my surprise, he left a voicemail. I turned on the speaker and played it out loud. Derek's voice sounded confused as his words melted together into the phone. He was asking where we are, thinking that we were going to hang out. We were all glad we had left and agreed that this had been wild. That's when the phone rang again. Another voicemail popped up on my screen. In the dim light of the trail, I played the new voicemail aloud once more. His drunken speech was more intense this time, as he launched into how he didn't understand why I had left. He said I had hurt his feelings and he was in love with me. The tone of his voice shook me when I heard him say he loved me. There was something dark and heavy about it that left me feeling unsettled. We were all creeped out, but happy to see the bright sign of the hotel ahead. We traveled the carpeted hallway to their room so my friend could grab her keys to take me home. As we entered the room, my phone began to ring again. This time, the voicemail sent shockwaves of fear through my body. Derek's voice had taken on an edge as he repeated that he loved me, but he was actually really mad at me for leaving him at the bar. He went on about how could I do that to him, and he didn't know what he was going to do. His voice shook with anger as he stumbled over himself, expressing how I had betrayed him. The last thing he said before hanging up echoed in the hotel room. He said in stern voice, "You know, I'm really starting to hate you." This guy was unhinged, and I was terrified. I was grateful this side of Derek hadn't shown up when we were alone in his secluded trailer. My friends gave me a hug and told me to call them if I needed anything and to keep them updated. My friend took me home, and as I unlocked the door and stepped into the comfort of home, I felt exhausted. It had not been the night out I expected, and Derek's erratic behavior had really freaked me out. Fresh out of an abusive relationship, his actions at the bar, then the voicemails rang some all-too-familiar bells. That's when I saw the headlights. It was very late for anyone to be driving down my street. I peeked through the curtain. My blood ran cold and I trembled. Sitting in the cab of his orange truck was Derek. Mind racing, I panicked. This dude could barely hold himself up when we left, and he was blackout, obliterated. How did he drive across town to my house? How did he find me? I immediately remembered the other week when he dropped me off after my key was lost. How could I have been so stupid? I barely knew him, and we had only met 3 times. Derek's face was stony and etched with rage as he sat in the dark cab staring at my house. He wasn't getting out. He was just staring, while I was on my hands and knees peeking out the window. All the lights were off inside, so I was sure he couldn't see me. Then, the screen on my phone lit up. He was calling me again. I quickly hid it so he wouldn't see the light. Hands shaking, I played the voicemail as quietly as I could. Derek only said one thing this time, a phrase that sent terror shooting down my spine. In a drunken sing-song voice, almost taunting me, he quietly said, "Where are you?" I was terrified. Somehow, I hadn't really considered I could be in danger and chalked up all of the fear to my past experiences. Surely I was overreacting, and it was my fault for reading too much into this. I thought I shouldn't be this scared, and I don't want to make a scene. That last voicemail sealed the deal. I figured even if I was overreacting, at the very least he was a drunk driver. I called 911, and the dispatcher said someone would be there in a couple of minutes. As I peeked out the window, I saw him get out of his truck. He was done waiting. His heavy feet stumbled as they hit the pavement, and he looked around. Derek's voice cut through the night. He started yelling my name. The wild anger in his voice was tangible through the walls, and he just yelled into the street. He yelled, "Where are you?" Derek started to stumble towards my house when the flashing red and blue lights cascaded down the street, lighting up his face and highlighting every ounce of rage carved into his features. 2 police cars pulled up, and the officers got out. I was still peeking out from inside my dark house and couldn't hear much of what was happening. I watched them breathalyze him, which he obviously failed. The officers inspected his truck. They all spoke for a while, and one of the officers came to my door. I spoke to him about what had happened, and he was very empathetic. He said as unsettling as his actions had been, there wasn't much they could do without a direct threat. The officer let me know that they would be taking him in for the night, and he would be charged with drunk driving. He told me Derek would be out tomorrow, and to make sure I kept my doors locked and stayed safe. The tow truck came to remove his orange truck from the road, and I could see him arguing. The officers weren't having any of it, and they turned him around to cuff him. As the handcuffs locked around his wrist, he yelled out one last time. Looking directly at the window I was peeking out, he yelled, "I know you're in there. Why don't you come out to say goodnight?" As quickly as my street had filled up, it was empty. The quiet shadows of late night swallow the earlier chaos into nothingness. Derek texted me the next afternoon. "I'm very sorry about last night. I was in a bad place." I responded that his actions were unacceptable, and how dare he show up at the house my child lives at, and that I would prefer not to hear from him again. He apologized one last time, and I haven't heard from him since. Over the next few months, I would see him on a bike going to and from his workplace, so I know he lost his license. I was always wary that we would bump into each other, which thankfully never happened. I can only imagine how much angrier he was after that night lost him his license. I found out that he moved to the mainland a while back, which was quite a relief for me. I no longer feel as on edge around town. I have a bunch of woods behind my house, and when I was younger, my friend and I would go camping in them. We were like 14 years old. We went farther than we usually did one day and ended up coming out on a neighbor's property. So we just went back a little ways and started getting our things set up. My friend leaves to go use the bathroom, and I hear him screaming and running back toward me. He's not making much sense and was just sort of blubbering about Barbie and cat heads. I sort of force him to show me. We come out in a clearing next to the creek, and there are dozens of Barbie dolls strung up in the trees about 8 feet off the ground. There were cat heads on them. The dolls' heads had been yanked off and replaced with them. They looked like the cats' skulls had been removed. I want to say the dolls' bodies were dipped in red paint, but I don't know for sure what it really was. I start backing up toward our stuff, and my friend starts screaming again. He's off to my side and had just discovered a huge pile of cat remains. A bunch of Barbie doll heads were thrown in with them. We both threw up. We packed our stuff up and went back home. But it doesn't end there. That neighbor whose field we stumbled into, they are family friends, and they recently told my mom about their barn cats going missing. However, they hadn't thought anything of it since we have a lot of coyotes in the area. I hadn't told my mom about our discovery in the woods yet because I figured she'd never let me leave the yard again. A week later, 2 of their goats went missing. A coyote wouldn't have opened the gate and shut it back after slaughtering their goats, and there'd be some kind of leftovers. The neighbor's husband heard someone walking around in their yard one night and saw some guy roaming around in their cow pasture. They sort of connected the pieces. Someone was stealing their animals, so the husband went into 24/7 armed security mode. Another week or so later, he sees the same guy go into his barn. He calls the cops. It turns out it's some 16-year-old kid that lived on the other side of his property that had just moved in. The kid admits to stealing his cats, goats, and trying to take a cow, but he could no longer return them. The kid lives in a mobile home. There's nowhere to keep all these animals he's been stealing. The kid's father ends up telling the cops that he knew his son was taking them and basically slaughtering them in the woods. His son would then do weird things with the bodies. About the Barbie dolls, he stole them from his little sister and other girls who lived nearby. It wasn't until a year or so after that my mom actually told me what had happened. That's when I gave in and told her about my friend, and I basically stumbling into the messed up cats and Barbie dolls. As far as I know, they got the kid for animal cruelty and a whole bunch of other things. His family moved away not too long after. I used to work at a pub that was 2 miles from my house. My shift ended at about 11 p.m. one night. I stayed there for a couple of drinks, then started walking home. Now, this had been an exceptional night for me tip-wise, and I had close to $400 in cash on me at the time. Between the pub and my house was exactly one street light about a quarter-mile from the pub. The rest of the walk was in complete darkness. This was a dark night too. It was close to the new moon and cloudy to boot, so it was almost pitch black. Now I live out in the boonies, so there isn't even much light pollution to help out. Not long after I leave the pub, a car slowly drives by me. About a quarter mile down the road, the car slows to a stop, and it just sits there. I stop walking and watch the car. It sits for a few minutes, then slowly drives away. A couple of minutes later, the same car comes slowly driving back by me in the opposite lane. It gets by me, drives a bit down the road, and slows to a stop again. Then it does a U-turn and starts creeping back down the road towards me with the lights off. At this point, I'm getting terrified. I don't have a cell phone at the time, and there's no one around to see what's going on. The car is between me and the pub, so I can't get back to safety there. My house is still about 1.5 miles away. No way I can quickly escape there. I quickly run off the road into the woods and duck down behind a bush. I watch for the car, but it's too dark to see it with the lights off and bushes and trees between me and the road. I sit there for about 10 minutes, but don't see or hear anything. I'm about to make my way back to the road when I hear car doors closing. Now I'm really panicking. It feels like my chest is about to explode. The hairs on the back of my neck is standing up. I keep imagining someone sneaking up behind me. I stay hidden and hope to God whoever it is doesn't find me. I don't know how long I stay there, but I eventually hear car doors again, then cars passing by. I give it a couple of minutes, then ease back to the road. When I see it's clear, I haul ass back to the pub and let my boss know what happened. He said then and there that I'm never to walk home at night again. Either him, his brother, or his mom will give me a lift home. When the other servers and the kitchen staff hear what happened, they all say the same thing. Never been that terrified before. I worked at a convenience store. I was 17 when this all happened. There was this one woman who from afar seemed normal, but up close you'll notice something was a bit off. Her makeup was a bit weird. She would wear bright red lipstick, sometimes yellow or bright pink, and always a bit messy. She always wore the same thing and walked around like she was slightly confused. I remember the first time she entered the store. She bought a 30-cent pack of gum with a $10 bill. As I was giving her change, she stared at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. "You're so pretty and beautiful. I want to be like you." She complimented me with an eerie grin. I replied, "Thanks, here is your change." Then she said, "Did you know I have $1 million? I'm also going to marry Ryan Seacrest, and we're going to live on a big house on the moon. I would tell you where I hid my $1 million, but I have the power to not tell you." She also said many more wacky things similar to this. I figured back then that she meant no harm. She began frequenting the store much more. She would enter with a silent smile, walk round the store without breaking eye contact, and leave in silence. She usually went in just to stare. I told my friends about her, and they agreed she was creepy, so I started carrying around pepper spray just in case. Then she began to actively stalk. I would be walking my dog and she'd be staring at me from behind a car. I would be sitting on my balcony and she'd shout, "Hey, you look so pretty today." Sometimes I would be walking down a store aisle and she would be behind a rack, giggling and whispering to herself. I'd turn around and she'd run away. There were also a few other places where she ran into me, which I don't think were just coincidence. Why the hell was she stalking me? The final straw was when she broke into my house a few days later, and I have webcam footage of this. I was ready to take a shower one night when I heard the front door open from all the way in my room. Then I heard a familiar voice say, "Oh, so this is where he lives." I freaked the hell out. I turned my laptop webcam on for evidence in case anything went down. I pointed the camera to the living room through my open bedroom door. I was panicking. I asked loudly, "What are you doing here?" Then she said, "I wanted to see if you were in here. Do you have a phone I could borrow?" I demanded that she go and use a payphone outside. She turns around, and I stand there watching her as she leaves. I thought she was gone, but I heard some rustling by my door a minute later. I ran over and saw her stuffing some of my family's dirty laundry into her shirt. I shouted, "Leave that alone. That is not yours." She dumped the clothes out quickly and ran away. I called the police on her, and she never stalked me again. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity. I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes and a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere. There were two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it was staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable, like a horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. I would pass the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman, then behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple 100 feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 east on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow, I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes, real life can be scarier than a movie. I'm glad that you're here with us today. Please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy a good scare. As always, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.